So good morning, everyone, once again. Just a reminder, our sessions are recorded, are posted on our page on Facebook, on YouTube. Sorry, on YouTube, not on Facebook. If you do not wish to have your name or your image shown, please take the appropriate measures to avoid it happening. We are back to the book In the Greater World. I'm going to share here with you. We are on chapter 16, the mentally alienated. And before we start, I'm going to remind everyone that this book was written, was psychographed by Francisco Xavier in the mid-1940s. So referring to experiences that Andre Luiz had at that time. So the words here are relate to the time that he dictated the book to Francisco Xavier. Now, the word mental alienated is no longer used. It was used in the past, especially in the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. Alienation means separation from reality. Now what we can use is mental disturbance, mental challenges, other words that we use to classify mental problems. There is still alienation being used as a concept of separating itself from reality in a much more diverse sense that it was used before. But the original word in Portuguese is mentally alienated. So it was kept in the translation, which is correct, but it's important for us to understand that it's no longer in use. I don't know, Elmo, if we have what would be the most appropriate use nowadays in medicine for those that go through this issue.
We use psychiatric disorders just to have a general idea of anyone who's suffering from any kind of mental alienation would be someone with psychiatric disorders.
Okay.
You may I?
Yes.
You could possibly use as an umbrella, okay, neurotic behavior or psychotic behavior. Psychotic behavior is a total estrangement from reality, and neurotic behavior is having difficulties with that reality. If you want to look at the big umbrella.
Okay. Thanks, Paco. Okay. So you have an idea of what we are going to discuss. So let's start, Philip, please.
The mentally alienated. Before we visited the caverns of suffering.
That's where we start.
Excuse me?
Yes, go ahead.
Colorado urged me to pay a quick visit with him to a large institute for the mentally alienated down on the earth. Then you will understand more precisely, he explained, addressing me with his usual courtesy, the tragedy of discarnates whose senses are in complete disarray. Except for the purely organic cases, the mentally ill person is someone who, out of indiscipline or ignorance, has tried to force his or her release from the earthly learning experience. Such a case is actually a type of cleverly disguised suicide, the self-elimination of mental harmony due to the soul's inconformity to the struggles of human existence. Faced with pain, problems, or death, thousands of people capitulate, giving in without resistance to the fatal disturbance that ends up opening the door of the grave. At first, they are merely discontent and desperate, which goes unnoticed even by those closely associated with them. Little by little, however, they become the many degrees of the mentally ill and nearly impossible to cure because they harbor inextricable and overwhelming problems. The imperceptible products of their own disobedience, they start by ruining the physiological patrimony that was entrusted to them and end up impoverished and wrecked, alone in a living hell, afflicted and half dead. These are men and women whose okay, can you bring it down just a little?
Whose suffering started with the early existence for having rebelled
Against the divine purposes, ignoring them and choosing their own foolish caprices while enrolled in the blessed school of the perfecting struggle.
Thank you.
Bearing these
Thank you.
comments. Okay.
So here, Andre Luiz, if you know the books of Andre Luiz, the Life in the Spiritual World books, Andre Luiz always accompanied by his mentors. He have experiences down on earth or in the spiritual world. In this book, they are visiting different places on earth. And this book, if we remember from the beginning, they discuss the brain activities and the activities of the mind. In the beginning, in one of the most comprehensive chapters of studying the mind of the spirit, they go through the division of the three aspects of the mind: the lower mind, the middle mind, and the high mind, or the lower brain, middle brain, and high brain, whatever you want to discuss, in terms of where we store our past, our previous experiences, where we live connected on the lower one, and the traumas and everything, the middle one where we live the present life and our experiences and our interaction with the world, and the higher mind where we have our spiritual experiences and our more sublime ideals and direction. So ideally we would travel between the three sides of our mind without any issues. We create issues when we forget other aspects of our mind and focus on especially on the lower one. But even if we focus on the higher one only and forget to live the present life, we create problems for ourselves. So they are going to visit these institutions. One of these institutions for those that are mentally ill, that in the past you had these institutions. Of course we still have them, but in the past many times people were thrown into those institutions and being abused and being mistreated. Nowadays we still have many problems, but there is a more scientific and sometimes spiritual approach to help and assist those that are going through these mental problems. It's important here when we talk about mental disorders, to understand that historically mental disorders have three major explanations: the supernatural, the biological, and the psychological model. So for much of history, it has been associated with supernatural, or a reflection of the battle between good and evil. And you see there how Spiritism brings this to the reality of what we see today, because eventually it moved on to the biological, meaning in the beginning of the 19th century, the scientists start to analyzing mental patients, concluded that it was all caused by biological problems. And then eventually with Freud and the evolution of psychology and psychiatry, it became also associated with psychological problems. Now, it's important to understand that according to Spiritism, it's a little bit of everything. We cannot separate like science or as we did in the past and say it's only supernatural or mythical or spiritual, because the origins in 90% of the cases is spiritual, as we are going to see later in this chapter, but it affects the physical brain, and affecting the physical brain, it needs treatment by modern medicine, because we treat the physical body with modern medicine that could be different aspects of medicine, and also with the psychological approach through psychiatrists, through psychologists. So a combination of all three of them, the spiritual treatment, the physical treatment, and the mental treatment, is what's recommended by Spiritism nowadays, okay? So here, what Calderaro is telling Andre Luiz is that except for the purely organic cases, which he says later in this chapter that is 10%, the person that is suffering from these problems is someone that out of indiscipline or ignorance are trying to escape from the reality of their physical lives. So he calls it a disguised suicide, because in a sense, the person is trying to escape from this world they are living in. So faced with problems of pain, of other issues, they try to escape by immersing themselves in their individual minds and disconnecting themselves from the physical world, from their surroundings. So as he says here in the beginning, they are merely discontent and desperate, but eventually they become mentally ill, because our mind as a spirit ends up affecting our brain and causing damage to our physical brain, and sometimes it becomes nearly impossible to cure, because once the physical brain is affected to a degree that is no longer can no longer be repaired, then we will have to continue living this physical life until the end of it with the issue in the physical brain. So these people, as he describes here, they are alone in a living hell, afflicted and half dead. They end up being placed in those institutions where they are treated. And nowadays, many times they are placed on the institutions, treated, released, and they end up having the same issues and going back to the institutions later with the problems. I think we have a question. Yes. Please go ahead. I don't remember how to pronounce your name again. Sorry. Piyush.
Yes.
Piyush, right? That's how I say your name?
Yes. On the first page, when it defined mental illness as someone who willingly tries to take his life or the earthly experience away, I'm sure it doesn't count those people who, in their deep meditations, have an out-of-body experience.
No, absolutely not. No, because those people are not mentally ill. They are experiencing their higher selves through different, through meditation, through elevating their souls. So they're not mentally ill. No. These are people that have. We're talking about people that here we we call people with psychiatric disorders or mental disturbances or other terms that medicine uses nowadays. But no, absolutely not. not talking about those that are using their meditation or enter into even to a trance through different forms of meditation and things like that. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Elmo, anything to add here?
Yeah, I think it's too early. I think I need to read a little further for me to understand what he's saying over here. But okay, so except for the purely organic cases, that's clear. You're going to make a differentiation of those who have mental psychiatric disorders due to a defect on the brain, and he's eliminating those, except those, right? And he put everyone else on this basket now of people who is trying to be an alien in his on the physical experience. And it's the way he describes it, he seems to be progressive, that they try so hard not to be where they are that they cause damage to their brain and become mentally ill, right?
Yes.
Yes. Now, this process is a process that they start in previous reincarnations. I think I'm gonna have to read ahead, or is a process that we start in this incarnation. If it is a process that starts in this incarnation, I find it a little bit hard to accept, because we see most of the cases of mentally ill, and again, putting everybody except for the organic causes in one single basket. We see cases that starts quite early in adolescence, and those individuals did not have enough experience yet to try to be an alien of the sufferings and things that he describes here.
Yeah, we're going to see that they discuss both.
Yes,
Yes,
so
you're
yes.
absolutely right. So the reasons, and he's going to tell us, Poderaro is going to tell us soon, that the reasons may be in this present life or maybe in previous lives. And we are going to see some cases here that are clearly related to previous existences. Especially, we are going to see especially a couple of cases that are directly related to previous existence. Yeah. But you know, in Spiritism, we tend to blame everything on previous incarnations, and not everything is previous incarnations, right? We have to consider the present life also. Some of the cases are people trying to escape reality from this life and not a consequence of previous lives. But this is, we could say in a sense that those that start early in life, they are more likely related to previous existences, and those that happen later in life may be related to present existence. Again, maybe, probably, but never guaranteed. Okay.
Yeah, and that's the reason I find it kind of risky to have two groups, one very small group of one who had to have the purely organic cases, and then everybody else in one single basket. I think we'd have to subdivide that other basket as well. But I think it's too early. You have to read more before we come to this conclusion.
Yep. Okay. So let's hear the first case.
Bearing these comments in mind, I accompanied Colorado on the morning's outing to a large establishment that housed a huge number of mentally ill. In the first courtyard, a number of mentally disturbed women were talking with one another. With a fierceness in her eyes and wearing the institution's uniform as if it were a royal gown, one gray-haired woman was saying to two listless companions, "I am a marquis. so I just won't put up with the meddling of these unconscionable doctors. I'm sure I'm being held here for secret family reasons, which I shall investigate the first chance I get. I may have powerful enemies in the royal court, but my friends are even more prestigious and loyal. She lowered her voice as if fearing hidden spies and whispered to one of her sisters in suffering. The emperor is interested in my case, and he's going to punish the culprits. They're cloistered me away because of petty money matters. Raising her pitch, she shouted unexpectedly, all of them shall pay. All of them shall pay. And she kept explaining herself with the hand motions of a grande dame. Oops, can't read the first line.
It pained me to observe the interaction between these incarnate
Patience and the pitiful discarnates crowded around them. Still prey to my old habit of curiosity, I wanted to hear the demented woman out, but the assistant rushed to say, let's move on. Unfortunately, we must pass by a vast display of expiatory suffering that is impervious to our immediate assistance at the moment. Here, almost all the mentally ill have abdicated reality and are stuck in past circumstances that no longer have reason to be. This unfortunate sister, for instance, held titles of nobility in her previous existence. She gave in to the negative energies of pride and vanity and perpetrated calamitous wrongs. She was reborn into humble learning experience for readjustment, but at the initial harsh trials of the beneficial correction process, she became frightened. She reacted against the results of her own sowing, surrendered her body to disastrous experiences, wound up placing herself mentally in the lowest realms of the personality, and began dwelling on her past of grand illusions. She has desperately clung to the memories of the vain Marquis of ballrooms that have long since disappeared. She roams the valleys of dementia in a dreadful state.
Okay, thanks. So this is the first case that we see that is a consequence of a previous incarnation, someone that abused their existence. Again, remember this book was psychographed in the 1940s. So someone that is incarnated in the 1940s and was in a mentally in an institution for the mentally ill. Previous incarnations, probably mid of the 19th century, because she talks about an emperor. So she may have been incarnated either in Brazil that had an emperor, or in France that also had an emperor in the mid 19th century. And what happens is that she abdicated from her present existence, as Calderaro explains here, that she was a noble in a previous existence. She was reborn in a humble learning experience for readjustment. But of course, with the trials of living in a humble environment that she couldn't accept, and again, we're not going to say she was not prepared. All our experiences, we are prepared to deal with them. If we are able to deal with them or not, it's our own doing. So we are never placed in a situation where we are not prepared to deal with. Our reincarnation process is taken care of by spirits that understand and know our needs, and understand and know where we should be placed for the better chances of us improving. They are never going to place us in situations where we have no chance of overcoming the challenges. The problem is that according to our free will, we fail to take advantage of the opportunities, of learning from the opportunities. So in this case, she of course uh, got scared, frightened of her humble uh, conditions. And again, going back to the three states of mind that we had, she places herself in the lowest level where the memories and the past experiences live. And by placing herself there and forgetting about the present life, she became mentally disturbed, and they ended up in that place where she lives, where she thinks she is, which is in the previous existence. And that's where she talks about her life in court, in the royal court, and the enemies that, of course, because of her actions as a noble marquise in that life, she, of course, acquired enemies that are those that are persecuting her, is the hidden spies that she listens. And she's saying that, of course, she probably knew the emperor, and she's absolutely sure that the emperor is going to help her, and she blames everyone, and everything else. The question here is why Calderaro says that there is nothing they can do for her at the moment, and that's why what he's going to talk a lot about this in this chapter. Uh, People sometimes have to go through the experiences, and when they are not prepared to be assisted, when they are not prepared to be helped, they are impervious to external assistance. They have to continue living in their own world until time has come when assistance is of use to them. So it's not that she's left alone, that she has no help at all. She has the assistance, always the assistance and help of the spiritual benefactors that are connected to her. She has a guardian angel or a protecting spirit. She has the familiar spirits that want to help her. But sometimes all this assistance is not enough for her to change her mind. So they are sending uh, vibrations of love, vibrations of, of assistance to her, but she needs to somehow open a little door for this assistance to reach her, so she can be more effectively helped. And of course, for Andre Luiz and Calderaro, just going through this institution one day, there is nothing they can do that can change her uh, in in that moment. So she's being assisted. It's not the case that she's not being assisted. It's just that Andre Luiz and Calderaro cannot add anything to to her assistant at that moment. Okay. Questions, comments? Nothing. Okay. Next case.
We hadn't gone far when we came across a new gathering in which an odd, extremely nervous woman stood out. God, deliver me from all of them. God, deliver me from all of them, she shouted. I shall never go back. Never, never. An amiable nurse approached and asked, Ma'am, calm down. Your husband is coming for a visit. Let's choose some clothes to wear. And smiling, aren't you happy about that? Can't read the top line.
No, I'm not, shouted the demented lady in an amazing expression of anguish.
I don't want to see him. I hate him. I hate him and everything that belongs to him. Repeating expressions of scorn, her body stiffened and a lamentable attack of nerve ensued, prompting the nurse to request immediate help. I wanted to stay and study the situation, but the assistant stopped me. Don't waste your time. You won't be of any help. We'll only be here a little while, so I suggest that you only take note of the refuge of the ones who have shirked their present duties in an attempt to flee the imperatives of the instructive reality. He changed his tone of voice and continued. We're not saying that all mental hospital cases are related exclusively to this factor. Many people go through this terrifying tunnel pressed by the demands of rectifying trials. However, we have to realize that most have inflicted the punishing drama on themselves. They are our brothers and sisters rebelling against the higher purposes that led them to recapitulate difficult lessons, such as meeting old enemies again through blood ties and facing apparently insurmountable obstacles. For the Spirit's enlightening journey to continue, it is essential that we change our mindset, examine ideas, and renew concepts. And for the greater good, invariably modify our inner way of being, just as we do with soil in the revivification of the productive farming or with restructuring any human institution for overall progress. However, if the soul refuses to receive divine help through the unceasing transformation processes that are offered for its benefit by means of various situations that make up the days of the physical learning
experience, it withdraws to the edge of the road, creating a disturbing landscape filled with unjustifiable wishes.
we could say that nearly 90 out of 100 cases of insanity, except for those that originate from a microbial assault on the brain, begin as a consequence of the grave wrongs we commit due to our impatience and despair, i.e., by means of mental attitudes that imprint deplorable responses on the pathway of those who welcome and nurture them. Once such destabilizing forces become fixated in the inner being, the disintegration of mental harmony begins. This disintegration doesn't last for only one lifetime, but many, until such persons are fully prepared to make use of the divine blessings that flow over them to restore their peace of mind and the capacity for renewal inherent to their individuality in the blessed work of evolution. Because of rebelliousness, the soul can set out on the road to many crimes, enslaving itself to their disastrous results indefinitely. Moreover, because it gets discouraged, it is prone to falling into abysses of inertia, causing a ruinous delay in the spiritual growth for which it must strive.
Okay, thanks. So here we have a second case that is very briefly discussed, a woman that is clearly in distress mode, that and she's been trying, they are trying to calm her down and say that husband is coming, and she says she's not happy. We don't know much about her. And again, the Calderaro tells Andre Luiz, let's not waste our time here because we wouldn't be of any help. And that's when he says we're only here a little while, so just take notes of what you are seeing, and notice that those that are trying to flee the imperatives of the reality. And he says here, he talks about how these cases start, that they rebel against the higher purposes. So we have to face the challenges, and our old enemies, we have an opportunity to repair, because we are reunited with them through blood ties, through our physical connections. But we, instead of facing the challenges of these past enemies as we have them in our families, in our close circle, we run away from them. We try to escape reality. Again, we're talking here about extreme cases, people that end up mentally disturbed, mentally ill, because many of us avoid facing our old enemies that are around us, but do not fall into these mental issues, mental problems. We just continue with our lives, and we just avoid facing those challenges. Again, we will have to eventually. It all comes back to us. We cannot evolve without resolving all issues that we have with all people, but not all of those that avoid facing their past enemies end up becoming mentally ill. That's important to understand. But what Calderaro tells us, which is very important, which is this last paragraph on this page, is that we need to always examine our ideas. We always need to change our mindset, renew concepts, and modify our inner way of being. So that's the only way we are going to progress. Because if we get stuck in our guilt, in our problems, in our inability to overcome the challenges, we risk becoming stationary, or as it says here, we become inactive, and that creates numerous problems. So we are offered processes that allow us to evolve, opportunities for us to learn and to change ourselves. And that's what's important for us to overcome the challenges that that can cause us mental issues. Okay, and here is when he says that nearly 90 out of 100 cases of insanity are a consequence of grave wrongs we commit due to our impatience or despair. So mental attitudes that we have. So the exception here, and I'm going to, maybe Elmo can talk a little bit later, is on the microbial assault on the brain, meaning the cause of mental illness is caused by physical problems, but understanding always that nothing happens by chance. So if we have to go through the experience of a mental issue, even if it's caused by a physical problem, we do not originate ourselves through our mental energies. It has a reason. Maybe we won't understand until later, until we're back in the spiritual world. Maybe it's a way of helping science to progress. Maybe it's a way of helping those around us to learn to be more care for others instead of only themselves. There are numerous reasons why we would be one of these 10 on these 10% cases of insanity due to microbial assault on the brain, as they the Calderaro says here. So, and also important to understand is that Calderaro says to us here that once this starts, it can take several lives for us to be able to repair it. We are eternal souls, so we live forever. We have many incarnations, and we can go through several incarnations with these mental disturbances if we do not address it. And why we are not addressing? Because we get discouraged, we fall into the abysses of inertia. And the inertia, what causes is a delay in our spiritual growth. So we do not progress enough to overcome the challenges that come our way. And one of these challenges is the mental issues that we have to deal with. Elmo, you want to talk a little bit about the physical side of it or anything else?
For the best of my knowledge, the microbial factors in the brain you cause neurological problems, not psychiatric problems. But then again, it's to the best of our sciences. So just like any other part of the body can get infected by virus, by bacteria, by fungus, it will cause neurological problems. The best that I know, those today are well treated. So for his commentary, there's two things. One, perhaps our science of the 1940s, without especially MRIs, could not identify those infectious processes because they have no means of viewing. Today, somebody comes to the hospital without a metastasis, get an MRI, and if it's infectious, if it's bacteria, you're going to see an abscess. If it's fungus, you're going to see multiple abscesses. If it's virus, you're going to see encephalitis. So we have means of seeing that today that perhaps they did not have when this book was published. Or looking forward, it is still things that our science cannot distinguish. But I don't think in the books of psychiatry, to the best of my knowledge, again, I don't deal with psychology, there is any classification of psychiatric disorders due to infectious processes. Those would be neurological disorders, with the two different things.
Thanks, Elmo. Any other questions, comments here? Okay, let's go, Philip.
At this point, we entered a large patio in the men's area and met a man who certainly fit the description of a complete schizophrenic. He was surrounded by a number of gloomy spirits. The patient was like a perfect robot under their control. His gestures were mechanical, and in a very serious tone, he explained to a guard who was approaching cautiously, "Come here, Joao. Don't be afraid. Yesterday I was a lion, but do you know what I am today?" Looking at the hesitant attendant, he concluded, "Today I'm a banana tree."
I would undoubtedly have found this case to be an excellent opportunity
for enriching my experience, since I immediately recognized the complete integration between the victim and his unseen obsessors. The poor wretch had ended up as a puppet in the hands of typically wicked torturers. Calderaro did not allow me to stop, however. "The process of imbalance is complete," he stated, "and there would be no way for you to immediately recompose his mental energies because they are centralized in the lower region. The wretch has been the object of the hypnotic practices of relentless persecutors and is exposed to a continuous emission of energies that depress and drive him mad. Good heavens, I exclaimed, confused. What could help him? He's someone, Calderado added, who abused his personal magnetism in previous incarnations. I couldn't repress a spontaneous objection. How so? Magnetism has just come to light. Calderado, with his typical indulgent look, replied, do you think it all started with Mesmer? And smiling, he added, if we were to take the scriptures literally, the abuse of personal magnetism would have begun with Eve in paradise. He nodded toward the patient and continued. In the past, not too long ago, our thoughtless friend took his abilities to allure too far and used them for degrading adventures. Several women who suffered his corrupting action started sending
in constant explosions of noxious hatred, extravasations that our poor friend
deserved as a consequence of his many years of reproachable activity. Tormented by this persistent action, his power to resist weakened. He thus became a plaything, so to speak, of the destructive forces to which he had willingly attached himself when he enthusiastically embraced the outright practice of evil. It is impossible to say how long he will remain like this. Generally speaking, when we commit a wrong, we can determine the precise moment when we fell into disharmony. We never know, however, when the moment has come to abandon it. On returning to the straight and narrow pathway through the mire in which we wallow because of our indifference of bad faith, we cannot set a date for our return. We entangle ourselves in games of circumstance from which we can free ourselves only after a painful readjustment. Noticing my amazement at the cold, torturous, hypnotic action, the assistant considered. Don't let it get to you. Physical death doesn't suddenly modify minds that have been devoted to evil, nor is the duel between the light and the darkness restricted to the narrow circles of the flesh. So afterwards, we came across two elderly, silly men speaking in disconnected sentences. Time, explained the instructor, nodding toward them, always ends up revealing our true condition. Whenever people have failed to make their lives a priesthood of constructive work, as is our duty on earth, senility of the body is even sadder for the soul because they are no longer in control of the social rules forged for human living. Their minds become fixated on the lower impulses. Millions of our brothers and sisters remain stuck at the infantile stage of comprehension for centuries, unmotivated to make efforts at self-improvement. As long as they are supported by the transitory cooperation of relative
physical health, earthly conventions, financial means, and other temporary circumstances
that life on earth offers to those enduring the corporal experience, they live with the rights that society has granted them as citizens. However, as soon as they are visited by mental illness, a lack of resources, or decrepitude, they reveal their true spiritual infancy. In spite of the advanced age displayed by their vehicle of bones, they become like children again, for having dwelled too long in the superficial terrain of life.
Okay.
This
We went a little bit too far here. I wanted to stop a little bit early, but we'll go back to that. So here we facing a case of a schizophrenic. So schizophrenia is a psychiatric disorder characterized by continuous or relapsing episodes of psychosis, which is an abnormal condition of the mind that results in difficulties determining what is real and what's not real. So symptoms include delusions and hallucinations. Incoherent speech, behavior that is inappropriate for the situation. Okay, this is the characteristics of schizophrenia. And this patient was clearly in a state of hallucination for the eyes of those that only see the physical world. For us that understand a little bit better the spiritual world, he is obsessed. He's surrounded by a number of gloomy spirits. So he's under the control of these spirits. So it's a serious case of obsession that that can be. We know that a more serious case of obsession, we call it fascination, possession. We don't know exactly what his case here, but he is, as they describe here, a robot under the control of the spirits. So he's talking about yesterday he was a lion, today he's a banana tree. So he's completely deluded. And Calderaro talks about a complete process of unbalance, that he was a puppet in the hand of torturers. But what is important here is, why is he like that? Why he's under these hypnotic practices by these persecutors? Well, in the previous life, he abused his personal magnetism. And we know the definition of magnetism. It's someone that can influence others around them with a magnetic presence, with something of I would say a light or something like that, right? We call it magnetism, or we call it animal magnetism also. Mesmer, that he mentions here, was the first one, was a doctor that first studied the energy that occurred between animated and inanimated objects, that he called animal magnetism. And it's still called up to this day mesmerism, right? Spiritualists recently have revived, especially New Age spiritualists, have revived this. The word mesmerism nowadays normally is as a synonym of hypnosis. Okay, so Mesmer was a doctor that first studied. Kardec was studied magnetism before he started studying spiritism and before he started bringing spiritism into life. So he was a devote of Mesmer, and when he talks about spiritual and magnetic influences, and we use that in passages, we study magnetism, it all started with Mesmer. Okay, but here what Calderaro is talking about is this kind of fascination that a person causes on others through their personal magnetism. And he very curiously and funny, he talks about it all started with Eve in paradise, if we take the scriptures literally, meaning the abuse of personal magnetism. So this is a person that abused his personal magnetism in previous incarnations. And you see here, it's not only one. In previous incarnation, more than one incarnation, he abused his personal magnetism. And that's created a lot of enemies that now are his obsessors, that now are persecuting him, especially women who suffered his corrupt actions. So they start sending these lower vibrations, this hatred, and this is a persistent action, and he couldn't resist, and he ended up falling ill. And Calderaro says very interestingly here that we know when these processes start, but we never know how it ends, because the end of these processes, they have to run through the natural process. There is always assistance of a spiritual benefactors, but for us to go back to the straight and narrow pathway, as they say here, we have to go through the painful readjustment. We have to forgive, be forgiven. We have to, through our free will, be willing to face the consequences of our actions. And sometimes it can take a very long time. And also, of course, Calderaro mentions here that physical death doesn't modify these minds that have been devoted to evil. And the duel between light and darkness is not restricted to the circles of flesh. We know that this duel continues in the spiritual world, and we know many places in the spiritual world that are dominated by evil minds that influence the spirits that are under their domination and are subjected to that. Okay. The next paragraph, when it talks about the two elderly silly men, it's we were going to stop here on flash, but we're going to address it when we do our next stop. Okay. Anyone would like to? Yes, Piyush, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Just like there is a duration to the negative actions of the soul magnetizing and affecting other souls, will there also be a duration to the schizophrenia the soul is suffering from?
You know, we cannot say of a fixed time, because it has several factors into it, which is the obsessors and the obsessed. This is a sort of an alliance between both. So for this alliance to be broken, treatment is needed, spiritual treatment. If we are incarnated here, physical treatment is also needed, but only through the education of those that are going through the processes, we are going to be able to overcome. So the education of the obsessing spirits, the education of the obsessed individual. So how does this education happen? Well, there is a spiritual assistance all the time, but they need to want to get better. The process of wanting to get better, it may not even be a conscious process. It can be an unconscious process, but it needs to happen. So let's say, let's go to the simplest form of obsession. You have one obsessor and one obsessed. Both need to be treated and assisted. But it can happen that only one side is assisted and one side is willing to overcome. So the assistance of one side is enough to break this obsessing process. But of course, the side that was not healed continue to be exposed to similar cases, and if they don't make any changes on themselves, they can fall victim of another cases. Because we know that we have several lives in the past. So in these several lives, we have many enemies, and they are waiting for opportunities. Those that haven't overcome the problems are waiting for a way to attack us, to hurt us. So it's important for us to deal with both sides. But serious cases, that those that last for incarnations are the exception. They are not the rule. In general, our cases of obsession are not that complicated, and we are able to deal with them either in the present life or returning to the spiritual world or dealing with our own imperfections and evolving. So we cannot read these and get scared of us falling into these traps, because these are really the exceptions. These are people that were really abuses power, abuses their own ability to influence others, that create enemies. Those that commit horrible crimes in the past, that we know in history, those that committed horrible crimes, they are the ones susceptible to fall into these traps of obsessions that for by several spirits, and sometimes they need to be isolated, and they are isolated sometimes in the spiritual world, and they are sometimes protected here in the physical world, so not all of these obsessors can come to them. You can only imagine, we're not going to use names here, but some famous figures of the past that have committed horrible crimes, you can imagine how many enemies they have and how difficult it is for them to be protected from the consequences of their actions. So we have to face the consequences. Okay, but how long, it's difficult to say. It's individual, depends on each case. Luis?
Hi, John. On the subject of schizophrenic or people diagnosed as schizophrenic, it's a little out of the test, but I'd like to ask a question. It's my understanding that a number of ostensive mediums in the past have been wrongly diagnosed as schizophrenic just because they saw spirits, they interacted with ethereal spirits. Do you concur with that?
Yes, absolutely. It's actually it's a very good point, because throughout history, people were persecuted because they were mediums. Witches were burned at stake because they were mediums. And even nowadays, I remember someone that came to our center like 10, 12 years ago to give a lecture, was a psychologist, and I forgot his name. And he said that many of those that are in mental institutions are there for wrong reasons. They are only mediums that haven't been able to learn about their mediumship and educate their mediumship. So when they start seeing and hearing spirits, what they are is having mediumistic abilities that are considered to be mental diseases, and they normally are filled with medicine that only blocks the cause but doesn't solve the cause. So yeah, you brought a very interesting point. We forgot about the mediums, yes. But so again, still this today, right? In many different countries where mediumship is not well known or well recognized, and even in Brazil, where you have spiritism well spread and people know a lot about mediumship, you still have many people that are considered mentally ill because they are mediums and they don't know how to deal with it. So yes, very good point. Throughout history and still today. When I was doing a research for this class, I found that there are some people that even consider Jesus to be that he was mentally ill, that because of his behavior and his teachings. So if even Jesus was wasn't exempt from being considered mentally ill. I think we all that have issues are in good company at least, right? Anything to add here, Elmo? Because there's a lot here.
Yeah. What Calderaro describes there is a case of subjugation, which is the highest degree of obsession that we have described by Kardec in the Medium's book. Those individuals relinquish their will to the obsessors. So they really become some kind of a puppet at their hands, sometimes even aware that they are being played. They have no will to reverse or to react to the situation. So it's very likely if they are being evaluated by a psychiatrist, they will find enough evidence to classify them as schizophrenic. But we have to be careful and not label and not look at everyone who has a formal, and again, a formal psychiatric diagnosis of schizophrenia, that it's a subjugation process. We have to be very careful. It may not be. It may be something else. And when you're dealing with the mediums are usually well functioning individuals. They can see spirits, they can talk to spirits, they can allow spirits to express their thoughts to them, but in general they are completely functioning individuals in society. It's completely different. I wonder if there are mediums who are also have psychiatric disorders. The two things could coexist. I may be a medium and schizophrenic, but a health medium will not display anything that would label them as schizophrenic on today's DMS-4 classification for schizophrenia. And if it does happen, is a product of a very, very bad psychiatric doctor, and I can't imagine it being happening today anymore.
Thanks, Elmo.
Again, I'm being very clear. We're talking about the schizophrenia, who has very proper guidelines to be labeled as such by a competent professional. So you see a lot of disorders over there that people call it schizophrenia, but it's not schizophrenia. And in terms of duration, I think it's very interesting that, like this case, this thing that's going on for multiple reincarnations. So you can see that is a long, persistent problem that is aggravating throughout times for a long, long time to get to this level. The treatment as well is going to be very, very long. If it did not start yesterday, it's not going to be resolved today. It's some things that requires tremendous amount of time to be resolved and require the participation of all the parties involved. All have to progress together. If one side start to progress ahead from the other, that one moves ahead and kind of gets free oneself from the process. But if I cause my brother to be in some kind of trouble, it's my responsibility to alleviate my problems through trouble. That's why Christ said, no, on the way to the altar, if you have a quarrel with your neighbor, put down your gifts and go and reconnect or your brother, reconcile with your brother before you get to the altar. It does, and when we don't do that, the accumulation of the problems will eventually lead to this case of subjugations in which the individuals really become little puppet at the hands of the enemies.
Okay. Thanks, Salmon. Anyone else?
Comment that I like to make a comment that I do remember the gentleman, the psychiatrist that came and gave us the lecture. And I do remember vividly that he did say that there's no difference between a schizophrenic and a medium, except that in the case of a medium, there are not other measures that would attest to schizophrenia. Just like in educational psychology, just because a child scores 69 on an IQ test doesn't mean that he's retarded, even though the criterion says under 70. So you need extra measures to confirm that possibility. So the same thing happens in schizophrenia, in all mental disorders.
Thanks, Paco. Yeah. Okay. All right, Philip, let's continue here. This exposition refers to the previous paragraph that we are going to cover after we stop you.
Okay. This exposition couldn't have been more logical. Nevertheless, as I explained, that vast environment where so many disturbed individuals of both sexes were staggering about, completely out of touch with the reality of the world and without the slightest prospects of an imminent discarnation, I thought about the people who were reborn already impaired and disturbed, about the mentally disturbed children and the young people who struggle with juvenile insanity, about the many phobias that vex respectable and helpful persons. So I asked the instructor to explain these types of suffering, which can suddenly assail the most upstanding homes. The assistant wasn't caught off guard at all. Andre, this is a study of sowing in the present as well as in the past. Not only are we considering the learning experience of one ephemeral existence, but also the soul's pilgrimage on the infinite pathways of life, the imperishable life that continually moves onward, overcoming the impositions and injunctions of form as it purifies and sanctifies itself each day. While with us, you will witness a heart-rendering picture of spiritual sufferings. And it is most likely that in a mental hospital, you will learn something of the imbalances that affect the mind that has strayed from the universal laws. In fact, the soul's descent into the lower regions of death starts with mental alienation. In a mental hospital, it is possible to understand a little bit of the
insanity of men and women who are apparently mentally stable
within the context of earthly society, where they exchange the eternal divine values for immediate illusory satisfactions, but who later, beyond the grave, are relegated to unspeakable despair. As for the disturbances that accompany the soul from earthly birth to childhood, adolescence, or old age, it is crucial to realize the imbalance begins with disregarding the law, just as expiation begins with the misdeed. If a behavior has been adopted in discord with this reality, the spirit will invariably encounter the effects of its own action in every circle in which it finds itself. Whether within the mechanisms of psychological heredity or outside its influence, the mind, whether incarnate or not, will reveal itself in the reaping of what it has sown in the evolutionary field of daily effort. It will find itself on the mountain of advancement for having practiced the greater good, or in the valley of expiation for having practiced evil. As
Okay, thanks. So, so to start here, when they come across two elderly silly men, as Andre describes here, speaking disconnected sentences, and the Calderaro talks about time always ended up revealing our true condition. And what he's saying here is that when, as we get older and we lose our, and if we lose our sense of reality, of living in society, so we start losing the control of our environments and how to behave, we go back to our original self, and we may end up with our minds fixated on lower impulses. So if we haven't worked on our evolutionary path, if we haven't worked on improving ourselves morally and intellectually, we may end up, as he says here, stuck in the infantile stage for centuries even. So we end up living the present life when we are incarnated, the present life only to be worried and concerned of what's happening around us, and when we end up on the with old age, we may end up manifesting ourselves as who we really are, and that's where sometimes we see a lot of these people that go through processes of dementia, of Alzheimer, acting in a way they never acted when they were in a normal state of consciousness. And again, we are not going to generalize. There are exceptions, there are problems, but many times what he's saying here is that many times they end up manifesting themselves, who they truly are, without the restrictions of that society and our education according to the norms of society imposed to us. So they become like children again for having dwelled too long in the superficial terrain of life. This is very important, right? It's if we don't make any efforts to progress, if we are not taking care of our moral and intellectual evolution, we may end up manifesting ourselves according to our lower tendencies when we are older. And again, this is not something that we shouldn't be very concerned here, because the very fact that we are here trying to learn and try to understand better about ourselves is an effort to progress. So then Andre Luiz asks about, of course, what about the mentally disabled children and young people that from an early age show signs of insanity and the phobias that people have? And Calderaro explains that, for this we have to address the eternal spirit. We have to address the issues that we had in the past. So every action causes a reaction. We live, one of the natural laws, it's the law of cause and consequence. Everything we have done to ourselves and to others, we have to face the consequences. And when we talk about this, people think about the negative side, but also the positive side. Everything we have done of positive to others will come back to help us in the future. So those that ended up causing harm to themselves and to others, and that when we address the question that we had before, for those that committed terrible crimes, they are going to end up facing very serious consequences. There is one book of Divaldo that talks about the Marquis of Sade that reincarnated as a mentally challenged child in the interior of Brazil as a way to escape the many enemies that he had made through his that specific life that he had. I forgot the name of the book, but I can find out.
Please
But
do.
yes, I don't think it's translated into English. I think
Doesn't
it's
matter.
yeah, I think it's something with sex in the title, but I'll try to get for you, Philip.
Thank you.
So it's important that we always have the protection of the spiritual world. We always have the assistance. So sometimes these states of insanity, when we are mentally disabled as child, is a way of protecting ourselves from ourselves. We are being protected from the more harm that we can cause to ourselves because we are unable to deal with all the challenges that we have to face. So it's in a way it's a respite from the challenges that we have and a way to prepare ourselves for the tasks ahead. So as they said here, as Calderaro says here, the imbalance begins with disregarding the law. The expiation begins with the misdeed. When we cause harm to ourselves and to others, we create an atonement, an expiation for ourselves. And we will reap what we sow in our evolutionary process. So if we find ourselves advancing for having practiced the greater good, we will find ourselves also in the valley of expiation or atonement if we have practiced evil. Nobody is evil by itself. We practice evil and we have the consequences of practicing evil. Okay? Questions, comments? Yes, Carol?
John, in general, in the general term dementia as we know it now, would you say they're finding potential backlogs of people's dysfunction in a past life, or would it be more biological in nature as it manifests? I would appreciate any clarity. Thank you.
Maybe I'll ask Elmo to answer that. I have an answer, but maybe he has a better one. Elmo.
Yeah. Specifically with dementia, we don't see much literature in spiritism. Okay. Now, we do understand as spiritists that everything starts with the spirit. All of our illnesses, even the organic ones, has a genesis, a true genesis in the spirit. Okay? So, like any other disease or any other disorder, dementia would have a very beginning, very tip, the cause of it in the spirit, okay? But if you look at dementia today, in accordance to our present science, we are looking more of something organic, a brain defect. Okay, so it's being demonstrated, especially with functional MRIs, you see some differentiations. Alzheimer's dementia is being very well studied, and so many hypotheses today, including viral encephalitis that may start the process for dementia. Familial causes, not genetic, because you don't find a gene for it yet, but definitely familial. But as an spiritist, we know that everything starts with the spirit, and paraphrasing Paul of Tarsus, leads to something good. Is a therapy. Our physical illnesses may be a therapy for the spirit in itself.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Thank you, Elmo.
Yeah, one thing that I'd like to say is um, we throw around those words, dementia, schizophrenia. It may not be necessarily the way it's understood, especially today. If you go to a psychiatry book and look at definitions, because they're very specific um, guidelines to call a behavior or a pattern of behavior as schizophrenic or as dement or something else. So we use the word dementia over here, was translated as dementia, but maybe something else if you want to be very specific.
Thanks, Norman. Okay, so we have half a page only for the chapter, so let's conclude it, Philip.
As he prepared to leave, the assistant contemplated me for a while and concluded, taking into account not only the present, but also the distant past, the mentally ill are generally those who have loathed the blessing of the human experience, preferring to isolate themselves in their mental whims. The spirit tormented after death is always someone who deliberately avoided the realities of life and the universe, creating purgatorial regions for itself. Understand? I nodded. Yes, I had understood. And thinking about the morning's lesson, I followed the instructor as he silently left the area of observation. Later, we would meet with the benefactors who would visit the caverns on a mission of love and peace.
Thanks, Philip. Okay, so this is a very important paragraph here when Calderaro says, taking into account not only the present, but also the distant past, the mentally ill are generally those who have loathed the blessings of the human experience, preferring to isolate themselves in their mental whims. So there are those that are running away from reality. Normally, that's the case. And the spirit tormented after death, so it's someone that avoids the realities of life and the universe, creating purgatorial regions for itself. That's what we always say, that we find ourselves where our vibration levels takes us. So we find ourselves in the spiritual world um, in the lower zones because our mental vibrations takes us there. We find ourselves in places like Nosular or more evolved places because that's where we have merit being with our work and with our efforts. So when we talk about mentally ill, we have to to put it all together in one basket. What I almost said that we shouldn't do is those that isolate themselves in their own world and try to avoid the realities of their life, and life here in the sense of eternal life, not in the sense of one incarnated life. It's the eternal life and the universe. Okay, questions, comments here?
As I have said, usually all of our diseases starts with the spirit. We can see even in our mediumship meetings, spirits in the spiritual world who are completely detached from their own reality. They speak to us almost representing someone else in a different situation in which they are. Um, Individuals in this tremendous state of suffering, they come to us with attitudes of lordship and no more respect with me. I am a lord. You don't know who you're dealing with. Once those spirits incarnate, it's not going to be different because the thing is in the spirit. So you can see there how it's very likely that that state of mind, that spirit in the spiritual world is, will pass it on to the physical body that will have some differentiation from a normal brain, so to say, and will be expressed as in the many types of psychiatric disorders that you understand now. And so even though we put those individuals on a functional MRI, and you can see, let's say, difference of blood flow in one other area or anything like that on an MRI, we know that the true cause, the real genesis, is in the spirit. And just as I comment, is the only part of Andre Luiz books that I can remember that he's there just as a observant, takes no action, just to watch and don't do anything. You know, it's almost like someone in the Serengeti watching how's life in the Serengeti and see, you know, lions eating gazelles and you just watch, don't take part, you don't watch, you try not to interfere in any way, which is the right thing to do, is the only that I can remember that Andal Ruiz is there just to watch and do not participate, do not help, that don't try to do anything at all.
Yeah, yeah, very, very good observation, Elmo. But yeah, it's what I what I commented in the beginning, right? There is nothing you can do for these
Right,
people in one day, right?
right,
One
right.
morning, it was not even one day, one morning they were there.
And I can imagine how hard it was for him.
A man of action.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other comments, questions? Okay. Thank you all for participating. Next Sunday, which is the second Sunday of the month, we'll do the Gospel according to Spiritism. And I'll ask Carol to do our final prayer.
Or thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Elmo.
Thank you.
Infinite Creator, spiritual light and love, we are grateful for the opportunity to be together today for the study in the greater world. We are grateful to have a more in-depth study in which we have a better understanding of the cause in which those who are tormented in the spiritual world through being mentally alienated or through psychiatric disorders, we know that the original cause can be linked to the past, to the spirit. We are grateful that we have the terminology to go greater in this study. We are grateful to our spiritual benefactors, the good spirits, the mentors of SGNY, who are assisting us, who are guiding us, who are asking us to go forward in the momentum of our studies. We are truly grateful for all the opportunities that we have together to share in this Zoom and through the connectivity which is provided at this time. May we go forward with our prayers, with our studies, with our mindfulness, and with our introspections, taking good stock of ourselves in our activities, our mindset, our thoughts, and our actions. We can change each day. We can make each day more in depth to study, to be of benefit, to create our mind in a stronger vibration to prevent the onslaught of negative intervention or negative spirits. May we go forth today and we humbly ask for safety, for protection, for guidance for all of us, for our families, our friends, our loved ones, and coworkers. Those who may be suffering in our world right now, may they be comforted, may they be healed, may they receive the benefit of greater love and light through the energy of the Christ. We humbly close now and ask to be beacons of light, to receive the light and love of Christ within, to propel us in our hearts and minds to go forward with the messages of Spiritism. We close now and are grateful for all the blessings. Go forth now as beacons of light. So be it.